There are towns in America where $30,000 a year doesn't mean choosing between rent and groceries. It means owning a house with a yard, eating out multiple times a week, and actually saving money, while coastal cities price out everyone who doesn't work in tech. There's a parallel economy thriving in places most people have written off. These are real cities with restaurants, healthcare, and infrastructure where your buying power feels like cheating. In one town, you can rent a luxury loft in a historic warehouse for what a parking space costs in San Francisco. In another, no state income tax means your $30,000 stays $30,000 while you're sitting on a boat you actually own. If you're tired of being broke in expensive places, hit subscribe because we're touring 10 American towns where living like royalty costs less than struggling in Brooklyn. Let's start in the place that might just be the most affordable city in the entire country. Fort Smith, Arkansas is where the Wild West went to die and somehow turned into a functioning city with craft breweries. This is hanging judge territory. Isaac Parker sentenced 88 men to death here, and the gallows are still standing downtown, which gives the brewery scene a certain edge you don't get in Portland. Average rent for a one-bedroom in the historic Belle Grove district runs about $800 a month. That's 32% of a $30,000 income, hitting the exact affordability target financial advisors recommend. Fort Smith consistently ranks as the #1 most affordable city in America, and it's not because the place is falling apart. Groceries cost less. Utilities are reasonable. You can run your air conditioning in August without calculating whether you can afford electricity and food in the same month. What nobody tells you is that affordability at this level changes your entire psychological relationship with money. You stop doing survival math every time you buy coffee. The constant low-grade financial panic that defines life in expensive cities just evaporates. If you want that same affordability with water views, Alabama has entered the chat. Decatur sits on the Tennessee River with Wheeler Lake spreading out like someone spilled an ocean in the middle of the state. People here own boats, not because they're wealthy, because a decent used boat costs what 3 months of San Francisco rent would run you. Housing costs in Decatur are 40% below the national average. That's the difference between renting forever and actually buying property. Median home prices hover around $150,000, which on a $30,000 salary means ownership is a realistic goal, not a fever dream. What nobody tells you is that the South has this thing where people are aggressively friendly, and if you're from anywhere north of Virginia, it'll feel like a sociological experiment for the first few months. People wave, they make eye contact. It's unsettling until you realize it's just what happens when people aren't in a constant state of financial terror. For those who need big city amenities without big city rent, Kansas has the answer. Wichita is a legitimate metro area of 390,000 people that somehow opted out of the national housing crisis. It has museums, a symphony, a zoo, and a downtown with actual humans in it after 6 p.m. Rent averages under $1,000 a month. Median home prices sit around $200,000. For a city this size, that's essentially a glitch in how American housing is supposed to work. You get top-tier healthcare, restaurant diversity beyond chain food, and amenities that small towns simply cannot sustain. On $30,000 a year in Wichita, you're not in survival mode, you're comfortable. You can go to dinner, you can save money, you can afford hobbies that require actual spending. Here's the kicker, because your fixed costs are so low, you can actually afford to leave. You're not trapped by your cost of living. You can save enough to travel instead of just scrolling through other people's vacation photos while eating instant ramen. Meanwhile, Illinois figured out how to make industrial decline look almost elegant. Peoria used to be the punchline. Will it play in Peoria? But while everyone was busy gentrifying Brooklyn, Peoria's downtown quietly transformed. Those massive industrial warehouses got converted into loft apartments with exposed brick and ceilings high enough to make you forget you're in central Illinois. In Chicago, places like this rent for $3,000 a month. Here it's $800. Cost of living in Peoria runs about 26% below the national average, which means your $30,000 has the purchasing power of nearly $40,000. The Illinois River cuts through downtown. There's a sculpture walk, there's a riverfront museum designed by someone who actually went to architecture. School. What nobody tells you is that winter in Peoria is not a metaphor. It's a physical assault. The wind off that river will make you question your life choices. But that's the trade. Brutal winters keep the rent low. If you'd rather have year-round warmth and food that ruins you for everywhere else, Texas has options. McAllen sits on the Mexican border, and the cultural exchange flows both ways. The food here isn't Tex-Mex fusion nonsense. It's just Mexican food, the real stuff. Barbacoa that costs $2 and tastes better than anything you'll find in a $40 tasting menu. And because it's Texas, there's no state income tax. Your $30,000 is actually $30,000. Groceries in McAllen are among the cheapest in the nation. Healthcare costs are low enough that you can actually go to the doctor without doing cost-benefit analysis on whether your symptoms are worth the copay. Rent for a one-bedroom runs around $700 a month, which leaves you with serious discretionary income. What nobody tells you is that McAllen is hot, not cute summer hot. Legitimately oppressive, walk outside and regret it hot from May through September. But you know what makes heat bearable? Air conditioning you can afford to actually run, and not being in a constant state of financial anxiety. If college town infrastructure on a poverty budget appeals to you, Indiana is waiting. Terre Haute is home to Indiana State University, which means the entire local economy is designed for people with no money. Cheap beer, cheap food, free campus events you can attend whether you're enrolled or not. You can find luxury rentals, and we're using that term generously, for under $900 a month. But here's what actually matters. Terre Haute has some of the lowest utility costs in the Midwest. Heating, cooling, water, trash, it all costs significantly less than surrounding areas. That's the difference between budgeting every penny and having a little breathing room. What nobody tells you is that living in a college town when you're not in college is strange. You're surrounded by 19-year-olds making catastrophically bad decisions while you're just trying to buy dish soap. But those 19-year-olds keep the town alive and keep rent low because the pricing is built for students, not remote workers making six figures. For mountain views and property taxes that look like typos, West Virginia delivers. Huntington sits on the Ohio River with the Appalachian Mountains rising in the background like a postcard from an America that still believes affordable living is possible. West Virginia has some of the lowest property taxes in the country. Your $30,000 here has the purchasing power of $60,000 in Northern Virginia. A house with an actual yard, not a patch of grass the size of a yoga mat, is within reach. Median home prices hover around $100,000. That's not a down payment, that's the entire house. What nobody tells you is that Huntington has struggled with opioid addiction at rates that make national headlines. The crisis is real and visible, but people still live here. They raise families, they build lives. Because housing you can afford and a community that knows your name still matter even when everything else is hard. If you want to live where 4 states meet and nobody's fighting over luxury services, Missouri's got you. Joplin functions as the regional hub for Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The cost of living here consistently ranks in the top 5 nationally. Rent for a decent place runs between $650 and $700 a month. But here's the real advantage. Because there's no competition for high-end services, everything is priced for actual locals, not transplants with tech salaries. Spa treatments, gym memberships, golf courses, they're all priced for people making $30,000 a year, not $200,000. You can access luxury services on a regular basis because luxury here cost what basic services cost in expensive cities. What nobody tells you is that living in Tornado Alley means you develop a specific relationship with weather apps and basement access. Affordable living often comes with environmental drama. For those who want safety, space, and the ability to leave doors unlocked, South Dakota has a town most people have never heard of. Gregory is the kind of place that makes people from cities question whether they've been doing life wrong this whole time. South Dakota has no state income tax. Gregory has some of the lowest median home values in the country. You can buy land here, actual land, on a $30,000 salary. Crime rates are so low that people genuinely leave their doors unlocked, which sounds like dangerous nostalgia until you realize it's just statistically accurate. What nobody tells you is that isolation is real. The nearest major city is hours away. Winter is not a cute, seasonal aesthetic. It's a genuine test of whether you can handle months of cold and dark. But if you can handle it, you get something most Americans have completely lost access to: safety, space, affordability, the ability to own your home and your time. And finally, if you want Rust Belt reinvention with the lowest rent you'll find in any metro area, Ohio's got one last option. Youngstown is what happens when a city stops pretending the old economy is coming back and starts building something new. This is a former steel town that's reinventing itself as a tech and maker hub. Youngstown is frequently cited as having the lowest rent in America for a metro area of its size. size. You can find decent apartments for $500 to $600 a month. That's not a typo, that's your actual rent, which means your fixed costs are so absurdly low that you can actually afford to live, not survive, live. You can hit the theater, go to bars, visit weekend markets, eat at restaurants. Because when you're only spending 20% of your income on housing instead of 60%, everything else becomes possible. What nobody tells you is that Rust Belt decline is visible everywhere. Abandoned buildings, empty lots, the ghost of what used to be. But underneath that, there's something else happening. Young people are moving here because they can actually afford to start businesses and buy homes and build lives. That's not happening in Brooklyn anymore. It's happening here, in the places everyone wrote off.